Briefly, what I would like to do is to create a context. Of course, this is John has already noted, but really why are we talking about inclusive education? Well, there are many reasons for it, and we will talk about it this afternoon, but we're putting it in the context of an inclusive life. And the reason I think that's important to think about is I know lots of people actually who have had a pretty good inclusive education, and then they leave high school and they're not leading an inclusive lifestyle. So we're really, if we want to think about the big picture, we're thinking about an inclusive lifestyle throughout your life. Now, I also wanted to raise this idea for you, and it really starts with a question of, isn't it interesting that we have to work so hard to think about inclusive education? Isn't it interesting that we have to have, all these conferences and do so much study and so much advocating, working hard, coming together for inclusive education? Now, why is that? Why aren't our kids just going to school? Kids with and without disabilities. Well, one of the reasons, and I think this might be the primary reason that I would like all of us to consider, is that when you live with a disability or some other kind of condition that is seen in a negative way by society, you become devalued in the eyes of society. And so what do I mean by devalued? Am I saying that a person is not valuable or worthwhile? No, because I think all of us would agree that all human beings have inherent worth and value. What I'm saying is that when you embody some kind of characteristic or quality that is seen or judged in a negative way by society, then you in fact get seen as less than, not quite as valuable as, not as worthwhile as, second class citizen, maybe not even a citizen. And I would propose to you that indeed our students who live with disabilities and other kinds of conditions that are judged in a negative way in our society are thrust into a devalued social status. And once that happens to you, you are very vulnerable to other people's ideas about what you can and cannot do, where you can and cannot be, who you can and cannot be with, and so forth. And I am a trained regular educator, special educator, and Montessori teacher, although I haven't taught for a long time. But I do remember the difference in terms of what I was taught in regular education preparation, to be a teacher in a regular classroom, and what happened in special ed. And it was very different. The expectations were completely different. Where did that come from? Well, going back to this idea of devaluation. Now, this is a concept that has been written about by many people. I'm drawing on the work of Dr. Wolfensberger, who actually, developed the idea pretty extensively. So we have to remember, why are we here? We're here because we're representing people who have been marginalized and not just thought about in a negative way. It's more than that, thrust into a socially devalued status. Now, there are very significant consequences that come when that happens to you. Oftentimes, and I'm going to run through these very quickly, oftentimes your identity is reduced to that of your impairment or your disability. So my daughter lives with Down syndrome. It's amazing how many times during her education, that's what people saw. They had a hard time seeing past Down syndrome to seeing the whole person. And they made all kinds of assumptions about her, about what she could do, what she couldn't do, based on their ideas about people with Down syndrome. And as her parents, one of the things that we continually had to keep saying is, Actually, Mary is more than her disability. It's part of her identity, but she's got a pretty big identity. That's hurtful when your identity gets reduced to that of, one aspect of who you are. You get rejected, profoundly rejected. So, any one of our students who are in schools, inclusion or not, you'll find rejection. And of course, rejection is something that all of us can relate to. It's part of the human experience. But I would say when you are thrust into a devalued status, you are vulnerable anyway to experiencing even more profound rejection than you would if you had, societally valued status. We know this, that when you are devalued, you get segregated. Okay, so that means put apart and away, and congregated, put together with, quote, people of your own kind, is how it's oftentimes referred to. So many times, we've been challenged as a family, our daughter being fully included, we've been asked, are you sure you're doing the right thing? Doesn't she belong with her own kind? And my response, first time, it kind of took me back, but my response I learned over the years was to say, Mary's own kind. Oh, you mean people who like hip hop? Oh, you mean people who love theater? Right? So who would your own kind be? People that you have something in common with, right? But of course, when they were saying that to me, who did they mean? Other students with Down syndrome. You get surrounded by very negative role stereotypes and images, and I will show you some pictures in a moment. And so you're seen sometimes as a child who will never grow up, as a burden on the teachers, a burden on the principal, a burden on the superintendent, a burden on the taxpayers, a burden on the families. And of course, that's a horrible role to be in, isn't it? To be a burden, or to be pitiful. And or to be a charitable case, or to be a lifelong dependent client, or even to be seen as better off dead. I don't have time to go into a lot of explanation on this, but honestly, there is a lot of thinking out there in our society in general that it's so hard to live with a disability that actually somebody would be better off not being here. And being literally dying, which has profound implications. Any of these role stereotypes do. But honestly, if deep down, and you don't even know you believe this, you might think, well, it's so hard to live with a disability, but it would be better off if the person weren't here. Are you going to be a strong advocate for inclusive education? Probably not. We know lots has been written about this. I'm sure other people will talk about this, subjected to low expectations. People are often controlled, I think, in so much of the special education system, for example, when it comes to transition, the power brokers sitting at the table are the teachers oftentimes, who then just make all of the decisions and convince the student, and convince the parents that whatever they've decided is the right thing to do, even though it may be very different from what somebody wants. I was with a family and a young man, lovely young guy, 20 years old. He was so passionate about what he wanted to do with his life, and he wanted to go to college. He wanted to go to two-year college. That was his vision. And he's a fairly quiet guy, a reserved man, but he did find the courage to come to the meeting and to speak up to the student personnel director and tell him. It was very moving. And the student personnel director said, well, we've never heard you talk like this, Brian. We've never heard you say anything like this before. I had no idea that's what you wanted, but I don't think you could do that. What makes you think you can do that? You want him to come back to school to attend classes in special ed, because he'd finished school, right? And he didn't want to come back for his year of 2019, 21. And he was just completely dismissed. And instead, moved into a program. So discriminated against, abused, and as I said, even made dead. So just some pictures. We used to have these old institutions, right? Everybody's familiar with these. You still have Beatrice here in Nebraska. But what do we have now? Well, this is from Pennsylvania, but you could find these same kinds of examples here in Nebraska. This is in a special education school. These are what is known as snoozlin rooms, where students go for calming and also stimulation, sensory stimulation. And, I've been in schools where kids spend most of their days in these kinds of rooms. So, apart and away. This is a transition program where the high school has actually developed a mock CVS store. Like, why wouldn't you go to the regular CVS to learn how to work? Is this going to work? First of all, is it a good way of teaching to practice in something that's fake? Secondly, how much money do you think they spent on doing this? This is a brand new thing. We have places, as some of you may know about this, the Judge Rottenberg Center in Massachusetts, where children, they've tried numerous times to shut this down, continues to exist, where there are children with autism and also children from families who have, pretty significant issues. And so the kids would have what's called challenging behaviors, and they are shocked on a regular basis. So you will not believe this. In this country, right now, children who are in the Judge Rottenberg Center wear backpacks, and in the backpacks there are electrodes. And the staff monitor the students on the campus through a security system, much like you'd find at a big store, with the television screens. And if they see the student that they're responsible for doing something that they're not supposed to do, they simply push the picture. You see their keychain there? They push the picture of the student and an electric shock is emitted from a distance. Unbelievable, isn't it? And when the director of this place was challenged on it, the video was done, and you could see the students were very agitated when the staff went to reach for the keychain. And he was challenged. He said, "You see, the reporter said the students are really anxious. This is really hurtful." And he said, "Oh, no. To the contrary, it proves that shocking works." This is just being put into the role of a child. This is a young man. He's 21 years old. Special education classrooms, this is in a regular school, but it's off in a hallway all by itself. And what's the one thing that you see as you walk by? Have you ever seen such a huge dumpster of garbage in the classroom? We'll skip that. So, I thought it would just be helpful to put some words around inclusion. And, because I think it's good that we keep talking about it, trying to understand it. It's not always readily apparent to everybody what it is. There are lots of perversions, of course, that are out there. So here are just some words, again, drawn from the work of Dr. Wolfensberger, which I think are helpful. The idea of personal social integration. I know we don't use the word integration much anymore, but what this means to me is person-to-person contact. That's the way I think about it. Between students with and without disabilities, personal contact. Secondly, being in a rich environment of people that you can have all kinds of interactions with and make contacts with, and then from those interactions and contacts, develop a variety of different kinds of relationships with typical, citizens, with typical students there, members of the student body. And in typical shared activities, doing the things that all students are doing in school. And really being in the role of a student. So every year for Mary's schooling, we'd say, okay, this year, Mary is in grade 11. So she's a grade 11 student. And this is what grade 11 students do. And being in the typical physical and social settings. So just put that out there for you. I think it can be useful to sort of break it down and use those terms. And of course, we're thinking about full, meaningful, inclusive life in all of the different life spheres, some of which, the key ones, I've listed here. All right, so I'll just very briefly show you a little bit of Mary's story. She usually does this presentation on her own, but she is working and unable to travel, which is pretty exciting, as much as she used to be when she wasn't working. Mary, actually, when she finished school, she had gone to a high school that was a college prep school, a charter school, and in that school, everybody was expected to go to college of some kind, or post-secondary education of some kind. So Mary had gone on lots and lots of field trips, to two-year schools, to technical schools, to universities, and all of her friends were going to university. So she, at the end of her time, said, "Well, at school, I want to go to university," and I'll share a little bit about that. And she put together this presentation and she named it, and she called it "This is the Life." And that's because Mary couldn't wait to get out of school. Can you identify with that? And she got out of school and she started going to university, and she would come home so excited. She'd say, "This is the life, Mom. This is the life." So just quickly, a life of inclusion, that started when she was days old, as we were standing there dreaming, thinking about her future. Of course, I'm a teacher, so, we're constantly working with her from the very early age to read and et cetera, et cetera. Preschool, this was Montessori. You see she's in a very model-rich environment. Very interesting, they'd never welcomed a child with an intellectual disability. We said, why? They said, nobody's ever asked. And they were wonderful. It was a school that took graduation from kindergarten very seriously. And I remember, this is Hannah. This was Mary's first friend as a young child. Then she moved into elementary school, and of course when we went to sign her up, you had to fill out the forms. They looked at the forms. They said, "Oh, there's a school down the road for students like that." And so we, of course, advocated for her to go to her neighborhood school, which she did. She also was very involved in all kinds of activities. So she started dancing at the age of 5, loved it, and so this is her first dance recital. And she's still dancing. And when she was in middle school, all kinds of things that she was involved in the school, with the chorus, which was a wonderful experience. She and her friends started a little social club, a sleepover club that lasted for about 3 years. Then she went to high school, and so you can see in these pictures, it's an example of the words that I just used. She's in typical environments with typical kids doing typical things in valued role of being a typical student. So she meets lots of people, and out of the people that she's met, she developed relationships. So this was an overnight trip that they took. It was great. She was now, her friends were driving, so I didn't have to go, and I don't know exactly what they were doing, but it looks like they're having a good time to me. Her 16th birthday party, the only reason I show this is actually her hairdresser, who she connected with when she was 10 years old, said to her, "Mary, you're going to be 16. I'd love to give you a birthday party." And so organized the whole thing and had the nerve to organize it for a time when I wasn't there. So Mary and her friends came to the beauty salon. Tammy did all of the makeup and helped them to get dressed. And, then they took a limo to the school dance. Pretty exciting. Mary has done lots of different kinds of work because, that's part of getting ready for the world of work. This was her first job at 15 in a little neighborhood store, which sadly enough closed, but it was a great experience. She loves theater, so she's taken classes at our local theater, which is a wonderfully warm, welcoming place. And once again, they said, we've never been asked before to have a student with an intellectual disability in our classes. And Mary's very involved there still when she ushers, going to dances, all the typical things. Her future was bright. She then went to Westchester University for 4 years. She learned all kinds of things as a result of doing that, like learning how to get around by herself on the bus, on the campus. She took so many classes. She started out with a fine arts emphasis and then switched into health. And you know, you look at this class, Acting 1, you can tell, like, there's a wide variety of abilities in that class, isn't there? Mm-hmm. So it was absolutely really no problem for inclusion. So this is some of the things that Mary, classes she took. Just continuing on, right, with her interests. She got very interested in women's studies, did some very interesting projects in women's studies. She also did internships. One was at that theater, one was at the Democratic Committee. Tried out different kinds of summer jobs. So this job, she found out that she thought she wanted to work with young children. After this job, she said, no, I don't want to do that. That ended that. She does love working at stores because she loves fashion, so she's worked at a number of places making bath salts and soaps in this small family-run business. She did that for a while, and she started teaching and speaking. This was a very exciting day, as you can imagine, right? Her 21st birthday. And if she was here, she'd say, cheers, this is the life. Life after university. So Mary now works at Marshall's, and she just got another job. She's working at Red Robin. So she's doing both of those jobs. She's working every day, making decent money. She does lots of things at Marshall's. One thing is unpacking the clothes, bringing them out on the floor, colorizing, you know, organizing things by color. She also loves to cook, so this is a small cooking school started by a chef that she often attends. This is one of her friends, Jackie, and they're cooking. She's at Jackie's apartment, and they're making items for a party. She's still dancing. She travels. This is last summer. She went to North Carolina and visited some friends, and I don't know whether she learned how to surf, but she did. The board is pretty big, isn't it? Another friend who, they went blueberry picking, which Mary found out is really not her favorite activity. Then they made blueberry muffins. She loves theater, so this was a theater production she was involved in. Going into Philadelphia, which is, you know, quite close to us. She's learned now how to take the train in. And this was just recently. She went to Hershey Park with a group of friends. She's a volunteer with an upstart theater in Westchester, and so here she is at the volunteer meeting. She travels. Here she is in Australia, and there she is with her brother and sister. So she would say, you know, life is great. So I just wanted to share those images with you when we're thinking about full, meaningful, inclusive life. You know, that's what we're thinking about, a richly elaborated life within the context of your family, your school, your neighborhood, right? The larger community. Okay, so are there any questions? You can read the slide. It's a handout. I think it's pretty straightforward. I just put down some of our guiding principles. I guess the first one is really, the first two would be the most important for us, is that we believe Mary has gifts and she's here for a purpose. And those gifts are needed by our community. And secondly, you know, Mary's a citizen. She's a United States citizen, so she should have access to all of the rights, privileges. It's her civil right, isn't it? That any other citizen has.